Good morning, and we're still continuing with our conversation on the education sector. Of course, the pace was set by none other than the Education Cabinet Secretary, that is Ezekiel Machogu, following his announcement of the KCSE results 2023. And of course, over 899,000 students sat for that particular exam, despite over 900,000 registering for it, where the 3,000 the President called for a probe into that particular matter. You have heard from the stakeholders. Now it is time to hear from the analysts, various analysts in the education sector, to put matters into context, as we anticipate over 200,000 of those students to be heading over to the university. Good morning once more. My name is Abdiaziz Hashim, and welcome to News Check. And of course, as per usual, we'll be keeping tabs on various other stories making headlines at this hour. A little bit of the diary is that where the President William Ruto will be in Laikipia County. He will be commissioning of Nyanyuki Affordable Housing Program, the launch of the construction of Ngobit with Thare Lamurai Ngobit Girls as well, launch of the construction of the Kihara Primary School, roads at Lamuria Ngarerio. Hopefully I've said those names correctly. And of course, the Kettle House incident, where journalists as well as police officers and officers from Nakada were injured. Those bouncers or security guards who attacked those journalists as well as police officers will be brought forth before the Milimani Law Courts. And of course, the Council of Governors are currently meeting on certain education reforms, which is our main topic this particular morning at Delta House, where the COG offices are located. And of course, we do understand that the Interior Ministry will be giving an update on the status of security and of course the registration of those security guards that we were talking about, and of course the launch of the mandatory nationwide security vetting training and licensing of bouncers following that incident we witnessed at a Kettle House. That is our diary this morning, but let me get to introduce my guest this particular morning. We'll be discussing the status of the education sector. You can also chime in into the conversation at Abdiaziz Hashim 1 as well as at KBC Channel 1. Let me start on my immediate left is Mr. Joshua Nyambane, an educationist. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Alongside him is Dr. Vincent Gaido, the Secretary General, that is the National Association of the Private Universities in Kenya. And of course, a renowned figure here is Maliba Arnold. Now it changes from policy analyst to the strategic communication advisor of UDA party. Congratulations for that particular appointment, but still we require you on the policy bit because that is your main domain sector. Let me start with you, Maliba. First, let me get your thoughts on the KCSE results 2023. What did you make of it?
Well, generally, it's reflective of what the sector has been, largely. The 200 plus who are going to university, or rather earmarked to go to C+ and above,
yes,
is quite close to the capacity of universities in entirety, private and public, the absorption capacity. There's still room for more, but that then is allowed for the other channel. Nothing so much deviates from what has been the norm, except the little, what I would call the little administrative challenges here and there.
Yes. Of
course, sometimes they affect quality and such, but there has not been so much a departure from what has been in the past. If you're going to look at the education sector, even the exam as it were, it's quite a huge thing to look at. And it might not be easy to actually have all the strands woven into one fabric that you can hold into your arms and say, okay, this is how you look at it. Every facet has got a part to it. And literally everybody, every stakeholder in this end focuses on where they are. And for them, that is the noon of the entirety. You look at this humongous thing, and the side that faces them is what they look at as big. But I'm thinking it still speaks to why we are shifting to the new system. The transition is difficult. It's a huge undertaking. I've gone back and looked at how the 844 came in.
Yes.
Again, a similar problem was there. So probably there wasn't so much of what I would call institutional memory. Per se, if we were to document and look at how we worked through that transition, the continuous evaluation and evolving of 844, because the 844 that began, I think, in the late 80s is not the one that we actually are checking out, because after every 5 years there has been an evaluation, and over time it's changed that the last bit almost looks like the pilot project of CBC. So by and large, I think still the same thing, a little bit of less glamour that has been in the past, where it looked like it's a matter of life and death. We've started going back now to speak to other segments that had been left out.
Okay. Yeah. And of course, Daktari, given that you're in the sector of private varsities, is there much optimism from the sector players such as yourself when you see this kind of performance in the KCSE 2023 results?
Thank you very much for having me. And I would say there is a progressive improvement, which maybe we need to ask the ministry to explain. Since Matiang'i's time, when the students who were qualifying to go to the university were at one time about 70,000.
Okay.
And we have seen progressive increase in numbers.
Yes.
Last year, we had, I think, 171 going to the university. This year, we are now talking of 200.
Yes.
We need to ask ourselves one question. What is causing this continuous increase in the number of students qualifying to transit to the university with a C+ and above? Is it that students and those who prepare them have become more focused? Or is it, is our exam different? Or are we preparing them differently? But all said and done, we should not expect any waste in every other transition phase. If we are talking about 800,000 students going through KCSE, we should ask ourselves, why don't we transit all of them to the university? Why do we have some wasting at that level or not transiting to the next level? What happens? Because in my opinion, every student must transit to the next level. We should not talk about that at every transition phase we have some dropping off. We should actually be such that every person transits to the next level. So for us, I would say the 200 plus is very encouraging. It means some good work is happening in the secondary schools, and we expect this trend to continue to a point where we have every student who gets to high school transiting to the next level. Which should actually be by choice, whether you want to go to the university or to go to any other training opportunity. It should not be dictated by failing to get to the minimum expected. That's my opinion. Otherwise, I would maybe take this opportunity to congratulate those who were responsible for supporting these students and to encourage those who did not transit or get to the minimum qualification that it's not lost. We have opportunities. And maybe that is where the CBC comes in. That we shall be able, if the CBC is implemented as intended, we should be able to identify students, individuals, and their capacity and ability and competencies throughout the phase. It should not be getting them lost because of failure of an exam. We should be able to pick those talents, sports, art, drama, you know, so that at the end of the day, they will be able to become useful to themselves, to the society.
And still on that particular note, Mr. Nyambani, given that you're an educationist, you even saw the Ministry of Education clearly stating that there are some improvements, especially in various subjects that in the past few years we didn't see, like especially in the mathematics sector, also in some of the sciences. Is this an improvement to what the Daktari is saying that has been, is it the policies or has the personnel improved so that the students have been able to improve as well?
Thank you very much. May I take this opportunity first to give Kenyans Happy New Year. Okay. I believe still we are talking about the Happy New Year.
We're just the 10th of January.
Yes, 2024.
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be here. Specifically, when you talk about improvement, key subject areas, for example, you're talking about mathematics.
Yes.
Of course, is an accumulation of so many activities that has taken place for maybe a couple of years ago. We are now talking about improvement in mathematics. But I believe we have much to do.
Yes.
Because as far as we are concerned, for us to transform this country, education plays a very important role, not only limited to key as a few subject areas, but generally all the subjects. If I may speak about the Vision 2030, and I refer you to the social pillar.
Yes.
Education, as it is in Kenya right now, of course, you are seeing tremendous progress, like Dr. has put it, especially when it talks about gender parity. At least there is reduction of the gender disparities. But still, we have a question of, equity in education.
Yes.
As far as access of education and the number of teachers, still, of course, the government has pronounced itself. They are going to recruit at least over 20,000 teachers to the public sector, which is commendable. But we still have a large gap in terms of the student-teacher ratio. And that means the quality of education that we are giving our generation in Kenya is basically questionable. The doctor has spoken about CBC. This is still something that is out there for us Kenyans of goodwill and professionals to discuss. In fact, we need to bring our heads together. I would request the president, if possible, to open up a national forum where, again, we can do what we call in democracy, public participation. There is a lot of gaps that we notice, and this can actually compromise the future generations as far as...
But what happened to the presidential working parties? They were going around the country asking for views.
Well, they went around the country to ask for views. They came up with a report, and we congratulate them. But we still need to review things that do not work. At the moment, the major challenge facing education in Kenya, honestly, it's financial, support in terms of capitation. We need to make it just like an affirmative action, because as long as we are putting money in infrastructure, for example, roads, we also need to put more money in education, because then education changes the entire society as a whole. Yes.
And of course, before I introduce you, Philip Pandey has just joined us, a youth inclusion advisor. We'll be carrying on with this particular conversation, but I need to take our dear viewers. I do understand that we do have, in terms of what I told you earlier, the launch of the mandatory nationwide security vetting training and licensing of bouncers. You do remember this is a particular event that happened at Kettle House. Let's get to listen in. I do understand that the Principal Secretary is currently addressing the gathering. Let's listen in.
An entertainment center. Where do you get your bouncers? I'm told you go to the gym. Hapo hawatapatikana. Hapo mtatupata sisi. You will be found in training institutions, and once you graduate, that certificate is what will give you what? Employment. Okay? Man shall not live by bread alone. By aligning bouncers and the aforementioned officers with the corporate structure, there is a greater emphasis on standardized protocol, background checks and training, so that the company will have an obligation under the law to ensure compliance with the law. In the event of a professional misconduct, the license of that company is at risk. Are we together?
Yeah.
Any person who will be found to offer the services of a bouncer without being a holder of a valid training certificate from an institution accredited by the authority, or operating as a bouncer without being registered and licensed by the authority. The guard force number is the only proof that you have undergone vetting, you have undergone training, and you have been accredited. You will be committing an offense if you operate without being registered and without undergoing training. Okay? And you shall be liable to a fine or an imprisonment, or both, in case of a corporate or individual. Again, Section 69 of the Act is very clear. Each and every one of you who has attended this meeting today will get a free copy of the law from our office, Laundry House, 10th floor. Okay? The 21 arrested bouncers, as I've mentioned to you, in connection with the recent incidents at Kettle House Bar, shall, in addition to the charges already preferred against them, against the penal court, they shall also be charged and prosecuted for the offense of operating as a private security service provider, a bouncer, without a license under the Act. This is not an advisory. This is a straightforward warning that comply with the law. And it is a decisive step towards fostering a safer and more secure environment in our entertainment venues, recreational facilities, and sporting establishment. The consequences of non-compliance will be severe. Now, today as you are coming in, I've been given a report by the officers who are here that some of you came with handcuffs, some of you came with knives, some of you, I don't know, came with what. Now, the equipments at your disposal are provided for under this law. Okay? You have the powers to search. You have the powers to arrest. But the powers to arrest are limited to the citizens' arrest. You are supposed to cooperate with the national security infrastructure. Once you get somebody, you take them there. You are not a law unto yourself. It is an obligation. You cannot imagine that you can mnaweza pimana nguvu na askari polisi. You are not operating in isolation. You are part and parcel of the national security infrastructure of this republic.
Well, that is in terms of the launch of the mandatory nationwide security vetting that is currently ongoing, the training and licensing of bouncers, event security, as well as other security personnel in the entertainment sector, as well as a recreational and a sporting establishment. This, of course, emanated from the incident that we witnessed at a Kettle House this particular week, where, of course, journalists as well as police officers, including Nakada officers, were, of course, attacked by those bouncers. Some of them will be appearing before the Milimani low courts. Once we do get those live feeds, we'll be taking you to the corridors of justice. Now, going back to the theme of the state of the education that we're currently having a conversation around, as I told you earlier, education stakeholders have had the opportunity to talk about this, but we have analysts and key stakeholders in this particular education sector to just give context to the KCSE 2023 and, of course, what will happen next to those over 200,000 students and those over 600,000 in terms who will be going to the TVET's institution in various parts of the country. Introduce Philip Pande, a youth inclusion advisor. Philip, thank you for making time for us this morning, and we start on that particular note. In terms of, first of all, the capitation, 31.34 billion. The education sector is one of the most funded sectors in the country, given that in the last budget you saw over 600 billion was allocated, and of course in the supplementary budget it was added over 100 billion. So do you think the education sector has been well financed in terms of ensuring that some of these results that we're seeing in the KCSE 2023 are still improving?
Very well, Abdi. Thank you for having me. And once again, I join my colleagues and the rest of the nation in congratulating the KCSE 2023 candidates for stellar performance in the last exam. And of course, sending a message of hope to those who did not meet the university cutoff point, that that's not the end of life. Life begins actually after Form 4. Yeah. It depends on what somebody does and how they improve themselves continuously after this exam. That would make them see or meet their colleagues. It's funny that sometimes you go to high school with people and never see them anywhere again after that level. But if you continually improve yourself in the art space, in all the options that we have with university education, with TVET education, then there is a possibility that you're still going to be a constructive citizen of this nation. Now, to the fact that the Ministry of Education is one of the largest funded outfits in this nation, and not just in this nation. If you look at the GDP proportions of education funding across all the 7 and now 8 East African nations, Kenya is always the leading. So we spend proportionately higher than our colleagues and peers in the East African community in funding education. But that's not enough. Last year, and in a different setting, talking about education, we had mentioned that the Minister of Education was requesting actually for supplementary budget to finance, for example, the deficit in university education. And not just university education. There was still a huge deficit in funding JSS. There was still, needed funds to finance, for example, TAC that needed to recruit more teachers for both the secondary primary schools and the junior secondary education. What I would say is it is important that education gets such attention on the exchequer from the National Treasury, because we've always mentioned and said that education is an equalizer, perhaps one of the most fundamental pillars in the development of a nation. So what we spend in education reflects the results, for example, that we expect in other sectors, in economic development and in training our labor and workforce, for example.
Yes.
The supplementary may have sorted the temporary issues in education funding, but that is for the short run in just this fiscal year. What about our funding for posterity in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years? What is the education sector working paper and sectorial projections looking like? And how do we then ensure that development partners, the private sectors and other practitioners in the sector are able to invest in the space? Last year, Abdi, I would take you through a program that we had, and that was the East African Employability Summit. And one fundamental thing that we had, for example, coming from one of the DFIs, the African Development Bank, for example, is that there is a huge investment that they're making towards TVET education. How is the national government and the Ministry of Education, for example, able to tap into the DFIs and the private sector to support and complement education funding?
Tying into that particular capitation issue, let's take this link first of all, and then, gentlemen, I'll be back to you. In terms of the CDF, the Constituency Development Funds, we have heard from members of the Parliament complaining about the Treasury not disbursing those particular funds. Let's get to hear from a section of legislators at the corridors of the August House.
It has been a big disappointment, because the same thing he has done this year is the same thing he did during the last financial year. Now, how are the schools going to run? There is no communication between the CS and Parliament. There is no communication between CS and the schools on what is happening. Already more than 80% of our students rely on bursaries for their education. When you look at last year's poor performance in the national examination, it is due to inconsistency in the distribution of bursary funds arising from delays in disbursement of CDF funds. And you can see that this year it is even worse, because the students have opened without any single funds being dispersed to the schools. Secondly, how are we going to implement the JSS infrastructure development without funds? Already in some schools, students have moved from one grade to the other, and yet we don't have any funds in the JSS as far as the infrastructure development is concerned. The other thing that we are talking about is, why should we fund students in terms of bursaries at the tail end of the term. We are waiting until the end of the term is when we can disperse bursaries. At that time, the students will have delayed and they will have missed classes. And therefore, we have received a lot of disappointment from the CS National Treasury. What we know and we hear from him is too much English and economics jargon, rather than practical, actionable steps towards delivery of service. We are so disappointed. He owes us an apology, and he owes the students an apology and Kenyans an apology as far as inconsistency in disbursement of funds are concerned. Thank you.
Well, those are a section of legislators complaining about the disbursement of the National Government Constituency Development Fund. It started yesterday, where we saw a rarity where Azimio as well as Kenya Kwanza allied MPs made a press briefing on that, and of course issuing a threat to the Cabinet Secretary of Treasury, that is Njuguna Ndugu, of censure in the coming days if they resume or if they call for a special sitting. Now, it ties into the conversation we're still having here about the state of the education, especially on the capitation bit. I would like to go to Daktari now. Daktari, how critical is NGCDF in terms of bursaries? We do know that in the universities, mostly they don't require the bursaries. They are scholarships at the end of the day if you have performed well in the KCSE 2023. But how is NGCDF bursaries critical to the university sector?
Well, thank you very much. Of course, any money that would support education is welcome. But maybe before I answer that, we've already said here that the education sector receives a huge budget support.
Yes.
We need to ask ourselves a question. Of the vote heads, where does this money go? You realize that maybe a bigger percent of this money goes into salaries and such. If you look at infrastructure development, we still need a lot.
Yes.
But in terms of the national government, CDF, of course, it is important. And we know there are very many students who are benefiting from CDF in universities. In the new model, remember the government talked about scholarship from the government.
Yes.
There is the loan from HELB.
Yes.
And there is the household support.
Yes.
But of course, the household support, you realize that the levels of poverty in Kenya is on the rise.
Yes.
Actually, poverty is not going down. It's on the rise. Given the disruptions that we're experiencing as a country, as a global, globally, the wars that are happening in the world, and all these climate change elements are having an impact on the ability of people to sustain their own lives.
Yes.
And therefore, poverty is on the rise. Meaning, even the very household support that was identified may not be sufficient. And therefore, CDF support is very important. But there's one thing I always say about the CDF and all the bursaries that we give. How can we make this money sustainable? I have that we should have a system of making this money available sustainably through a revolving fund.
Yes.
That those who benefit from CDF, it should not end with them. They should put in a way that they will either repay or they'll give it back so that it can support others. I know politicians will always push the CDF because it also gives them latitude when it comes to their political availability, competition, and giving the bursary has become a political activity and a popularity thing. You'll find that they will call people to ditch the checks. And that creates connection. If we are honest, and if our parliamentarians are honest, as much as they are fighting for the release of CDF, which to me I think it should happen, they should also rethink of how that fund can be made available to others who will come later. Otherwise, to me, it ends with the student who receives it. Of course, we have a lot of students in the universities who have supported the CDF, and we congratulate those counties and parliamentary constituencies that support students with CDF, because it is important. That money should actually be useful to develop, because it's saying we are developing human resource that will eventually become useful to the country, but the money should be put in a revolving fund. We need a bill in parliament that will change CDF and money going to bursary so that it comes back. It does not just end with that student.
Okay, Dr. Going back to Maliba. Maliba, we're talking about the NGCDF fund. You even heard from the president. He clearly stated that those funds will be dispersed in the coming few days, but the MPs are up in arms. Is it politics, given that we do know that there are various students who benefit from this initiative, especially for the bursaries, not just for the secondary school as well as the universities, but we even heard the JSS, the teachers, are even threatening to go back to the streets, given that they have not been fully employed and they're not getting the required reimbursements from the government. Do you think CDF at least will curb those JSS teachers from going to the streets?
Actually, CDF as a fund is limited to how much it can actually support some of these initiatives. Even as we say that children are going to school with, you cannot even consider CDF a bursary. If we were to be honest, CDF is not a bursary. The support it's given in, that's why even at the HEF, the Higher Education Fund, it's not considered as a bursary, because it's not structured in a way that it can actually support education sustainably, and that is the nature of CDF. First of all, you will realize that a member of parliament, whatever batch he has for education, gets as many applications as possible. And for purposes of quote-unquote fairness, but let me just say for purposes of politics, they could accept to award everybody almost an equal amount. That's why you find people having checks of 500. Sometimes you get a flat rate of 5,000 or 2,500. That money, as much as is helpful, might not be so much of a help substantively. So, Melimia speaks about having a revolving fund. Of course, we've had HELB do that with all the challenges it's there. We now are trying to transform HELB into a more sustainable fund, into the Higher Education Fund, the HEF. It's a model that, of course, is still actually being put out there to work. So we already have got the solutions. The truth is that for the education sector, the biggest problem is the constraint on resources. Not that we lack ideas, not that we lack the capacity to improve.
Constraint of resources, Maliba, and they have the highest.
Well, having the highest on the budget just shows where the priority of the country is. That as a country, we take it serious that human development capacity is important and is given priority number one. But still, that is not enough, because if you go to the absolute numbers in budgeting, you realize that you need much more. So allow me to actually just say this. He spoke about more numbers of children going to universities. From my days, I think during the year when I sat for education, we were about, for my cases, we were about 90,000 that met the threshold to go to the university. It's actually an outcome of many things. Number one, there has been sustained investment into the education sector. Continuously, we've built new schools, we've trained more teachers, we've put in more money. You expect to reap that. And then, of course, number two, there is the demographic imperative that over the years we've had more children come to school. This year you will actually expect slightly more, bigger number going to. So it's a demographic imperative that the bigger the sample size, of course, definitely it goes higher. But then even there has been the deliberate investment and restructuring the sector. We now have got more universities than we had in the past. We now have got much more capacity to take in. Actually, the number of students who are out, who actually have qualified this year is not the capacity that we have today, because I think we have got a capacity of up to 250,000 to 300 intake as a country. So that particular other gap is filled in by expatriates, or rather people who come in, foreign students and other people. So the sector has been growing. And for education, when you invest in, it takes a little bit of time before you actually see the results. You change how things work out, and you see that now we do not have A's coming from the legacy national schools.
Yes.
Now it's a reality. You can even get it out of a day school.
Yeah.
Actually, leave alone an extra county, a day school.
Yeah.
And that was the whole idea, to liberalize education, to make access as easy as possible.
Okay.
And that way, then that is how you actually create equity. There's the element that those of us who sit here to discuss this particular issue,
yes,
a lot of times I see the temptation and the disposition of us speaking from the bias and the privilege of having gone through the 844 system. When I was growing up, the people who had gone ahead of us always told us that during our days, class 4 was like class 8, and class 8 was like form 4.
Yes.
The reality is that now as an adult, I realize that it's not true. It's entirely not true. Every generation wants to actually think that the sun was at noon during their prime, which is not true. So even as we discuss CBC and we discuss moving forward, we really need to actually also be aware of the bias, that the implicit bias that actually shows up from where we grew up and what we went through.
Yes.
So the financing bit of it, we will go around that for a very long time. But you see, the economy has to grow.
Yeah.
We have to make much more money. And in that, we will be able to finance it much better.
Okay.
So meanwhile, you know, Hashim, when you have, let me say, for example, you have got 200 shillings in your pocket and you need to have dinner. Do you forego having dinner altogether because the money is not what you wanted? You might have desired something else, but you improvise so as to fit in. So as much as we have that particular money, there are challenges around disbursement. You could actually go out and try to blame the Ministry of Education. But the Ministry of Education does not necessarily have money. It gets money from Treasury.
Yes.
Treasury gets money from CBK. CBK gets money from KRA. KRA gets money from Kenyans. So if we try to put things in context, we are going to have a very healthy policy discussion. But if we then look at it from the perspective where it's only this set here, before everybody sees this set and us talking, there are cameramen here. Behind the cameramen, there are guys in the gallery.
Yes.
The guys in the gallery have got the people in management. The people in management have got guys at the policy level up to the ministry. So it's quite a big line, but we can actually talk about what we've done well, where we are going, and how we improve. Truth is that all the proposals we are giving here, if you look at, for example, I don't want to even talk about the existing education sector policies. Let me talk about the Kenya strategy for work on work and wealth development. It's a paper done in 2013. And you'll see a lot of things that has actually happened. Number one, we've again, allow me just before I go to that. He spoke about encouraging those who have not attained the C+ that is required to go to attend to university. And you know, he sounded like going to university in and of itself is actually the target of why people go to school. So the philosophy as to why we have got education must actually change. Partly, of course, it's reflected in our decision to actually go the CBC way. You know, the future of work is so much about the skill sets that get things to work. Also, we must also start speaking to ourselves and accept that as a country, we degreenized the country. That them without a degree are looked at as a people who didn't go to school, as a people who cannot even deliver and function in the economy, which is a lie. Because the biggest bulk of the people who are employed in this country, we're talking about the formal sector, are just about 3.5 million. And I'm talking about the data that KRA will tell you, the people who do pay as you earn. The bulk of those people, and I'm talking about a country that has got a workforce of 24 million people who are productive. The people carrying the burden of the economy are people in the informal sector. So if we are going to continue with that narrative, the projection that going to university is all there is a lie. Secondly, we've put in over 30 billion shillings to just work around the TVET sector because we realize that today the place of work has changed and people want skills. People who've built will tell you that they can struggle to get just a good person to lay their tiles. You can buy very expensive tiles, but you don't have anybody to do that. So you realize that you are getting people to go around that. But finally, on this, would be that we are going into the world is already entering into what we call the fourth industrial revolution. It's a phenomenon that we really have not figured out properly how it will look like. It's heavily punctuated, or rather will be characterized by three things: big data, Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. And everything that can actually be automated will be done. You might not even need this cameraman. But the people who think, the talented people, the journalists, the people who can create content, those are going to be the professions that we'll actually have to look at as we move into the fourth industrial revolution proper. So we must also prime ourselves to meet the future and not to be doing catch-up the way we've done all along.
And of course, going to Nyambani, in terms of what Maliba is speaking to, you're an educationist. Are we changing with the time, given that it started off with 7423, I guess, we went to the 844 system, now we're in the CBC system. Will this address some of the emerging new trends, not just in the education sector, but what is required in the employment, in the formal or in the informal sector? You have seen even in the CBC coming up with recommendations of reducing subjects from 14 to 9. Will that address some of the teething problems we have in our education system?
Thank you, Abdi. First, allow me to speak about the National Government Constituency Fund. Unfortunately, may I say that Kenya is a political economy. So the social economic development of Kenya depends on politics. And the politics actually also depends on the social economic aspects. I can give, maybe let me challenge my panelists and the entire nation. Why do we have a governor, county governor, giving a bursary, members of parliament competing to give bursaries? Why can't we synchronize and say this is basically an intervention? Because the so-called bursaries cannot even actually buy, with the current economy, cannot even sustain anything. Cannot even buy shoes, because if you go to the butter shop, one pair of shoe is actually 2,500 Kenyan shillings. So you're giving a bursary of 5,000, and this child requires a whole shopping to go to school. There is nothing there, just to say the truth. So this is simply politics, and I would rather the policies of the government. We have so many policies. We need to assess the impact of these so-called CDF funds and the intervention in the aspect of education. Of course, I also want to concede that because of the poverty levels, the high poverty levels we have, the gap between the rich and the poor, to some extent, the interventions brought in actually will, in the long run, try to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, and in as far as the access to education is concerned. Because I still want to believe that access to education and equity is a misnomer. We continue to say a lot, but we do very little. Our current government was voted in the platform of, kuweka pesa kwa mfuko. This is not yet realized. I just want to challenge that education is the best option. If we can empower our Kenyan young generation through education, that's the best way you can put money in their pocket, rather than other, programs. And then you spoke about the CBC. Well, the change of the curriculum in Kenya, of course, the rationale could be depending on the international demands in change of education, or our observation of the previous systems and how they have not addressed the issues and the needs we have. The 844 system, if you ask me as an educationist, wasn't necessarily a bad curriculum. The implementation aspect has always been wrong, because you cannot have a system and then you have no implementer. Because in Kenya we have so many policy formulators. If you go to any university, just across here, the University of Nairobi, you cannot miss policy formulators. Somebody who can give you a very smart policy, which can be actually be borrowed by even China. The problem we have, and which I want to say, is implementation. who is going to implement CBC, for example? Yes, CBC is a very good curriculum because we want to really see what does the learner do as opposed to what does the learner know. And perhaps address the issue of value, because there is erosion of values as far as the past education system is concerned. Because everything is actually anchored on a grade A, which according to me is not a reflection of either failure or success in life. Because failure and success in life is not basically anchored on grade A. But a child who has a grade C but can be able to engage himself or herself in robotics, because this is where we are going as far as the industrial revolution is concerned. But I want to challenge us. Well, we have a good system, but I still want to say the implementation of this system depends on the teachers. We have inequality in teachers. The teacher-student ratio, I just want to say this. Let the government allow the private sector to come in. There are so many schools that are investing in infrastructure and retooling most of the teachers, more than even what the government is doing. A government school, for example, which has 70 kids, a teacher, only 2 teachers, teaching 300 pupils. They are supposed to assess what we say competencies. How can a teacher teaching mathematics assess 100 pupils daily, assess their competencies? How? Tell me how. When you go to a private school, let me just mention, for example, Merisho School, because I am based there.
Yes.
When a public school has only 2 teachers to teach CBC for grade 7 of more than 300 learners, as we have 9 of them. So each learning area has a tutor or as a teacher. Now, on whose interest are we implementing CBC? Look at the infrastructure. We want to say that we are looking at the sports and talent. We are building talent. I always ask myself, if we accepted to change the system, we also must be ready to invest in terms of finance. Nobody else is going to come here and finance for us the system. If you want to train a child, you want to know the skill of playing or swimming, and in almost an entire county, you have only 2 swimming pools. They even don't meet international standards. Which type of education are you giving to the generations? I think we have a lot to do, and that's why I suggested, to be honest, that we need a conversation. Yes, we have policies, we have the report from the President Task Force, we have educationists, we have people of integrity in Kenya, we have people who can bring solution to problems, but we need to discuss this whole issue again.
Yes. Gentlemen, allow me to take a short commercial break, then we'll be back with this conversation. Philip, don't worry, we'll be back in this conversation carries on. And of course, you can also chime in into the conversation at Abdiaziz Hashim1 at KBC channel. But we're looking at the status of the education after the KCSE 2023. What next, given that our universities are expecting this student and the number keeps on increasing? Should the private sector, such as the sector that Dr. Vincent is currently spearheading in terms of the National Association of the Private Universities, should we be seeing private universities coming in to at least assist some of accommodating these students, because the number keeps on growing every year? Don't go too far. We'll be back with that particular discussion. Welcome back. We're talking about the state of the education sector. You know that this week the pace was set by none other than the Education Cabinet Secretary, that is Ezekiel Machogu, following the release of KCSE 2023 results. We're looking at afterwards, what happens to these students? Over 899,000 of them who were able to sit for last year's examinations. And of course, we're looking at the prospects. What are their options? Some will be going to the universities, others will be going to the TVET institutions, but there's still hope for the 48,000 who had at least scored a mean grade of E. Insert here, we have Dr. Vincent Gai, the Secretary General of the National Association of Private Universities in Kenya, NAPOK. Maliba Arnold Nyanjai, a Strategic Communication Advisor for the UDA party now. We do have Philip Pandey, a Youth Inclusion Advisor. And finally, we do have Joshua Nyambane, an educationist. Let me go to Philip. Philip, we have been brought up into this culture that Maliba was talking about, that once you go into school, you need to go to secondary, then to the university. But there are other informal people who are working in the informal sector who might say are making even more money than people who are employed in the formal sector, especially for the youth. We have been inculcated, we have been brought up in that particular culture. Should TVET institutions be an option now?
Absolutely, Abdi. And there is no better time to emphasize the need to build capacities of TVETs and send more students and young learners into them than now. This is why we've overemphasized enrollment into our universities, so much so that anyone that does not qualify to go to the universities then looks like they are less a human being. They didn't do the right thing. They wasted a whole 18 years going through, basic education. As opposed to the thought that was propagated by my colleague Maliba. I do not really support the fact that we should inculcate the attitudes of having to go through a university. Rather, I'm one of the proponents of CBC, and I would say that if somebody has to terminate at standard 8, now we're talking about grade 6, and pursue their line of competency. So long as they're a good communicator, so long as they are able to do something with their own hands and manipulate objects or what they will have to do, so long as they can pursue their talents and they can communicate properly, let that person go into what they're supposed to do. If somebody has to be a doctor or take some technical colleges through TVETs, let them go into those spaces. Because why are we pursuing CBC? We are pursuing CBC so that we get the best out of an individual. We are not pursuing CBC now to get everybody through an education system all through the end. So the emphasis on TVET education has to take more momentum now. And like I was saying in my opening statement, last year we had a conversation with Africa Development Bank. The head of the education unit was with us at the East African Employability Summit. And they're saying that they're supporting TVETs hugely to ensure that the mid-level students, the average student, does not miss out in technical training and opportunities to fend for themselves. Today, and like my colleague Maliba mentions, we have 31 billion that is going into the TVETs, and not just 31 billion. In the current budget, we have about 1.5 billion that is going into the budget for TVETs specifically to talk about and finance employability and entrepreneurship skills. Why are we doing so? So that as we train students at the mid-level colleges, in the TVETs, in the vocational colleges run by counties, we're ensuring that they're also able to gather entrepreneurship skills so that they don't just get out as technical people. They could get out as technical people, but with a group of 3 or a group of 5 forming a company of plumbers, of mechanics, and opening the garage immediately after the technical training. The other thing is in terms of financing education, and I agree with my colleagues that we don't need this layer after layer of individuals and institutions trying to create their own funds. Yes, we need diversity, but are we able to consolidate? I would say that we have, other than the county government funding, other 8 or more devolved funds, CDF being one of them. Why CDF is devolved is it can only work in a particular constituency. Your MP gets his 120 million to serve that particular constituency. That fund is ring-fenced for your constituency. But are we to use CDF to finance higher education, for example? I say that we shouldn't do that without a doubt. This is why. CDF is supposed to make things more equal for the people that are fighting for equity and equality at the bottom of the pyramid.
Okay.
If somebody is able to qualify to go through and qualify directly for a university entry, they have other forms of bursaries and financing, one of them being higher education funds, and the Loans Board has been existing for a long time. Now we have a mechanism that is financing that has been revised by the current administration, which is based again on the need level, which is a good thing, which is a good milestone, so that we don't just dish in money to everybody that do not perhaps need them. So what is CDF supposed to do? CDF is supposed to fund basic education and basic infrastructure to ensure that access to education is guaranteed to a majority, a dominant majority, that would otherwise do not meet the criteria or do not have an opportunity to get to the universities. I feel offended when I see a PhD student with a constituency check. I feel offended when I see a master's student with a constituency check funded by the CDF. And I also dare say that in the current administration, in the current dispensation, we don't need CDF to finance higher education. I'll tell you, I was not from a very privileged background, but I only got CDF once in my 4th year. To tell you that, I would have completed my university education without CDF, but with the money that I got from HELP, the financing from the government in terms of JAB, supported my education. So CDF has to focus on basic education, basic infrastructure for primary school, infrastructure for secondary school, and the level that it has to end is support vocational access and technical education for people who have no any other choice or no any other mode of financing, so that we ensure that equity, parity and access is guaranteed to everyone and not just lumping funds to people that are already privileged. Why would, again, a PhD student apply for constituency funding? Why would a master's student apply for funding from the NGCDF?
And of course, let me go to Malibe. He's itching to answer you. But as you answer as well, Philip, in terms of the funding, let's go back there. It's all about to ensure funding that, especially from HELP, it's equal to everybody. With that person, be it from the PhD to the masters, if they qualify to be funded by HELP, they can be funded. But we're also looking at the private sector. You do remember that the government even clearly stated that they will no longer be funding the private sector in terms of funding. Should we be seeing that coming back so that it can be an equalizer to ensure that some of all these students are absorbed in those institutions?
The funding of education, like I said earlier on, that the biggest problem we have in the education sector is not about ideas, it's not about anything. We have good capacity. There's a glut of capacity. We are even importing as in exporting. But it's a constraint of our resources. As a country, we are not where we want to be. So it then calls upon the leadership of the day to do prudent management of the little resources that we have.
Yes.
So, talking about, by the way, the Higher Education Fund, now HEF, does not consider CDF as a bursary. It's considered as a harambe.
Yes.
Because MPs do not have tools that are actually, you can actually use to say that it's actually helping, especially when it comes to allocation of bursary money.
Yeah.
An MP gets 3,000 applications. He has this small part of that particular money. He distributes equally so that then he is not fought against. That cannot be considered, because a bursary should be funding a specific need. And of course, there are those, then you will find university students who are given 10,000, 20,000. If you are lucky and you are connected and probably very personal to the member of parliament, you can end up with 50,000. It's unfair, by the way, for anybody with a master's, anybody with a first degree going upwards, still asking for funding from CDF. That is rigging of a system. It's immoral. It might not be illegal, but it's immoral.
It is illegal, actually.
People who already have got a position standing up with means to cater for themselves should not be fighting for money and resources with the same with children trying to just get into Form 1 and Form 2 who probably just want money for the day school they are going to. But that has been happening. That is why I do not think that when MPs speak of CDF disbursement as for them it's a campaign, it's a political fund that they use for other things. So specifically, there is a level that CDF has actually contributed to education. Yes, specifically in infrastructure, they've done very well in primary schools. And it should be remembered that CDF for us was the pilot project for devolution. As it stands in law, CDF should not be where it is. But then Man is not made for law. Law is made for man. So, of course, at the moment we have got the consensus that the way CDF actually works on the ground, we have to find ways of actually legalizing it. And that is why you see it in the NADCO report. You saw it in the President's memo to Parliament. Because you go to the ground, you have it working. But the policy is not so complex. And I'll just love to remind Mwalimu there that policy is not any complex thing. It's just a plan. And in looking at policy, policy has got 3 P's. The first P being a problem. The second one is that you come up with, you look at the politics around the problem, and you come with the third P that is specifically on the program that then takes care of the problem. That's how you simplify policy, the 3 P's. Number one, there is a problem. If you can actually recognize that there is a problem here, every problem has got attendant politics. Then you think about how do you manage the politics around that particular problem. Then with that, you come up with a program that then handles or rather solves that particular problem. Right. That is where the problem is. And there's this lie and notion that has actually been sold for a very long time, that Kenya has got some of the best policies that other countries borrow. You know that is a lie, because in my policy classes, a bad policy is any policy that cannot be implemented. So you cannot say that a policy is good if it's not implemented, because part and parcel of policy is implementation. So if it's not being implemented, it's a bad policy. And let us not confuse ideas for policies, because ideas can cut across. People can actually benchmark, look at the ideas you had and everything else. So when they come up, because part and parcel of policy is implementation. So if you're looking at the policy cycle, if you were to go now outside of the 3 that I've actually spoken about, the simplified version, you've got 7 steps around policy. Part of it is actually how it's actually being implemented. So if it's not being implemented and there is no feedback loop to it, that is a bad policy. It doesn't matter however good ideas were in it. So the lie that Kenya has got some of the best policies and other countries just borrow them and copy paste is a lie. That is as in a white lie. Because a bad policy is any that cannot be implemented. So if we've had ideas, let us not confuse ideas on paper and call them that is policy, because policy includes implementation. So on financing, I think we will have to come up with more ways about how we make higher education financing or resourcing sustainable. Because when Module 2 became a little bit of a way of universities being able to sustain themselves, then there was this notion that people who came in through, quote unquote, what was called parallel. By the way, since the dawn of 844, C+ was the cutoff for anybody to do a degree in this country. It's remained so. But you know, what then became as the JAB, initially, JAB, now we have got a very long name around that particular process, is that it created a class. We are a country that loves classes. Then it's like, this one is parallel, this is, so you're looking at how did you go to university? I was a parallel student. So even with that, we started then dividing ourselves around that, not knowing that the JAB part of it was about resources, not about class. It was about resources. So as a country, we have got this number of, or rather this amount of resources. So how then do we distribute? Then the government will say, this year we will sponsor 10,000, we will sponsor 50,000. So somehow then we started having pride in, just because you are government sponsored, you are special and more authentic, which is a lie. But be that as it may, is that we then have had, over the last 15 to 20 years, rethought the higher education sector. At some point we missed, killed all middle-level colleges and turned them into universities. We are now deliberately walking back, having realized that was a mistake, and that the middle-level training is actually required. Like, for example, I'll give you, if you look at Vision 2030, we need about 15,000 engineers, a fresh set of engineers. But every one of those engineers needs 15 technical people to work with. If we were to, as in, just look at that. Do we have colleges that can actually do that? We do not have. We actually are top heavy, where we have got more universities. Today you have got about 600,000 university students. You have got a very lean number of people in the middle-level colleges, and a market that is hungry for middle-level competence, level of skills. So you've got a lot of university people, or other graduates, complaining that they don't have jobs. And then you have got very few middle-level college trainees whom industries are capturing and running away. The Middle East is literally wiping them off our market. So we need to rethink that so that then we work according to how the market speaks to us. Otherwise, Hashim, it's important again to repeat this, that a degree is not a meal card. A meal card is an entitlement that when I show up at the desk, I'll get a meal. A degree is a license to hunt. If you don't go to the forest and hunt, you'll go home hungry. But it's a notion that has been there for a long time. So even as we work onto the new system, giving our children skills that they need to actually be functional at the workplace, we should also now work on the mental side. Because one of the reasons why people were running away from polytechnics and technical colleges was that you were looked at as inferior. Even though you will realize that some of those diplomas are so technical that people who have done some degrees cannot do it. Yeah.
And of course, Daktari, to you, given that you're in that particular sector, especially in the private varsities, are you addressing this missing link? Because the issue of unemployment has been there. We're seeing people with even master's degree, PhD, and they don't have jobs at the end of the day. Where is the missing link? We have all these graduates, but in terms of absorption in the market, and of course what Malibo was also talking about, it's brain drain. We're seeing some of our brightest going outside the country and offering those services and increasing the human resource capacity of other countries instead of our own.
My one simple question is, how do you expect it different if you have an economy that is shrinking? The economy, the investors must equally delve into where projects can happen. Look at what is happening. People with money in Kenya today would rather invest in buildings, construction. In this Nairobi, there are so many buildings that have been put up with less than 30% occupancy. We seem not to be innovative. We are generally an importing country. If you look at all the trucks that are coming in, they are going out empty. Those containers come full, they go down empty, because we are giving very little to the world economy. But we are net importers. Our people who have resources and the money are not creative to become empire creators. The best they do is to put up high-rise buildings with very limited occupancy. So we need to also challenge ourselves. And as I listen to my colleagues, I don't know why I'm feeling like there is some antagonism between universities and TVET, and there is none. And that is why I said I do not celebrate when I'm told that only 200,000 students got C+ and above. I want all of them to get C+ and above and go to wherever they want to go by choice. There are many students who this year got their A's and B's and whatever. They have qualified to go to the university, but you'll realize some of them will go to TVET by choice.
Yeah.
And that is what I want. I don't want us to beat education. Universities exist, and they do what they do, and those who go to the university come there by choice, by qualification and by choice. And therefore, university education feeds the economy that has its need. But when an economy is thin, it is not able to absorb. You realize that people with university degree going into or seeking jobs that are below their qualification. So that to me is something that we need to address. And more important, we need the industry also to have a conversation, a very deliberate conversation with the universities. As much as we are talking about, in universities we don't have final exam. Every exam a student takes in the university is final. And therefore, the development of curriculums and syllabus in the universities need to be synergized with the industry. And I have always insisted on a deliberate collaboration between industry and universities, so that universities train and release individuals who will be useful to the industry. But the moment there is a gap, industry will always say that these students who are qualifying are not good enough for us, because there is a disconnect. Maybe you could allow me to just mention something on the CDF.
Okay.
We need to understand CDF. Okay, giving bursaries. To me, that's a political thing. But if we really want to have a successful CDF, I want to see an MP who will focus on development projects. Every constituency in this country is unique. And the people within those constituencies are unique, and they have unique economic capacities and activities. I want to see an MP who will focus on specific projects that will make people, the constituencies, have money. Look at farmers. We have a lot of waste after harvest. Milk, maize, all this fresh produce. The season for mangoes is coming. The market will be filled with mangoes. But how do we make it such that we can still have a constituency that is a producer of mangoes, and farmers will benefit throughout, so that they have money, because their farming is supported by CDF projects, and they will pay for the school fees. They don't need to go queuing in an MP's baraza to be given a check of 2,500. But they can go to the farm, do whatever do through projects that are supported through CDF. They'll have the money, and they'll support the education system. I mean, the education for their children. So to me, that's the way to go. Okay. And finally, I don't see any conflict. And I have no apology for being in the university sector. Because those who come to the university come by choice, and we support them. And today, we have very many Kenyans who are not only working here, but they are working elsewhere. Yes. Because universities should prepare a global worker, a global workforce, not just a person who is local. And we'll continue supporting university education, and we'll continue supporting TVET, because both are important for this country.
And of course, Nyambari, given that we have seen the deficiencies, I will call that, in terms of unemployment of so many people in the country, especially when it comes to institutions mandated to place these students in various institutions across the country, like KUPS, for example. KUPS one time clearly stated that they were looking at some of the areas that are not fully employed, or they don't have personnel, or the human resource is a little bit low compared to other sectors. When KUPS chooses a course for that particular student, and that student doesn't want that particular course, yet they want to go to a course that has so many people, in terms of that placement of students, will that alleviate some of these issues, especially when it comes to unemployment and issues of such as brain drain, taking our human resources to other countries?
Well, Auntie, I believe we need to look at this matter in a larger perspective. Well, all of us are products of university. All of us seated here. And I agree with Daktari that there is no contradiction and anything to worry about universities and TVET. But I think countries that progress economically, and the major difference between Kenya and Singapore today, I beg to disagree with my brother, because he said that policies are not policies, and Kenya doesn't have a policy that anybody can borrow from. Well, that is his own opinion. What I know is that at independence, 1963, if he cares to read, you will realize that Kenya actually was ahead of Singapore in terms of the GDP.
Yes.
But progressively, what happened? Policies borrowed. It is written in history books that there are quite a number of policies that were borrowed, particularly from the sessional paper number 10 of 1963, which was borrowed heavily, not only by Singapore, but largely even South Korea to some extent. Now, the issue to do with Kenya as our country is that, well, we have a vision, because countries progress with visions. And this vision, for me, my opinion is, can only be achieved in two ways. The first one is through education. And of course, the second will be doing trade in a smart way. And today we are talking about the international trade. The TVET, they are very important. If you read more about Philippines, you realize that the TVETs play a very integral role. Why? Because the skills that these graduates who have not achieved the university grades are going to achieve, they are practical. And they are actually in demand. And therefore, they will actually lead them to employability. And not just to be employed, but have longevity, because they have a skill that is required. If you look at Vision 2030, Kenya still, I believe, I know people can argue that Kenya is an industrial economy, I don't know, whatever. My opinion still stands that Kenya is purely agricultural economy. That's my opinion. And I don't want to disagree with anybody who says Kenya is an industrial economy. So what is the vision of Kenya in summary? That we need to move from the agricultural economy to the industrial economy. What does the industrial economy require? We require people with skills, trade. For example, we need more methods. Now we have the housing project. And I'm happy by the government of Kenya is investing much in the TVET. And these graduates, people who, over 700 people, Kenyan kids, will they will not go to university directly. So they must go through procedures for them to learn in the university. So they will get opportunity not to be wastes, to become drunkards, but they will go to a TVET institution established by the government of Kenya, and I'm happy, partly or even 100% funded. And they'll be able to get the skills, and these skills will require them to transform this country. So TVET is a good idea. I know my brother spoke. At one point in time, we made a mistake. We abolished them and converted some of these, institutions into universities. But still, universities are not bad. They are playing a very integral role. Apart from the skill and practical work-oriented jobs, we also require people in the education, educationists, planners, those who may not necessarily do the practical approach, but they're behind the software to come up with the vision, which can eventually be implemented. Well, finally, what I will say is that if a country, of course we know governments, a state actor comes up with a policy and does not implement. So if you walk up to any institution in government and you find there is wonderful policies that are not implemented, that's a tragedy. Because at the end of the day, they will gather some dust. So what are we lacking? You are telling me what you're lacking is leadership. Because how can you invest in policy making and then you don't implement it? And how do you even progress a country? Because a country, if you look at how we run our families, I'm a young, of course I need guidance from my teacher. I may not be able to know much more. But we learn families based on, what we plan. And if you plan to take your child to school, and then you don't take your child to school, who do you blame? So the point is, we have opportunity as a government, we have opportunity as the people of Kenya, we have the population, let us give this population at least something to do. Final on that, the TVETs are actually a very good aspect when it comes to the competence-based curriculum, which does not condemn the child to oblivion. That if I don't get a C+, which is the requirement to join any university in Kenya, at least I don't get condemned to failure in life. I have an avenue. I look forward to the ministry and the government at large, and even the CDF that we have discussed here, to look at the modalities on how to transit these Kenyans who have not excelled very much academically, because we are looking at grade A and judging someone, which I don't think should be. So CBC has come handy at the right time. We transit these young Kenyans to join the TVETs, and I know the bright future is coming. Thank you.
Practicals is the way. I'm coming to you, Maliba. We're talking about implementation, as Nyambani has talked about. We are so good in that, in terms of creating those beautiful policies, and they collect dust wherever, in the corridors of the August House or in government shelves. But in terms of the sessional paper number 10, it sought not only to eradicate disease and poverty, but illiteracy as well in the country. That's why you see, even when Nyambani talks about comparison between the Asian tigers and the country, that is what even the president has been saying all along in terms of the implementation of policies and the decision we made back then. That is why Kenya, we have stagnated at the end of the day. But also, as you respond to that in terms of the issues of implementation of the policies, we're also talking about the needs that are being created by the current regime that will be here for until 2027. They're talking about the agricultural sector, the manufacturing sector, and the affordable housing, especially in terms of masons, engineers. Those are the needs. How are we going to change the mindsets of these young learners so that they can at least ensure that they study those grounds so that they can satisfy the current need of the current administration?
First of all, I just needed to correct the notion. I actually felt feel like there is antagonism, probably in how I actually presented it. That's not the case. I meant that, to just qualify that, I actually said that we've put about 30 billion shillings in revamping and reworking the TVET sector, for example. But one of the challenges they have is mindset. And this is not the doing of the universities. It is purely, as a country, we then degreeized the country. That you're going to look for somebody who actually wants a front desk officer, and they actually are putting their first degree. So when we degreeized the country, the mindset shifted. It was a wrong approach to how we looked at things. And then, of course, even official policy followed. Like, for example, when we took the technical colleges we had Kenya Poly, which is now the Technical University, Mombasa Poly, and then you find that the bulk of the courses they are offering are the bulk of humanities and arts and everything else, shifting away from why they were established, because they were heavily technical institutions. What have we done? We have gone back to, we then realized that our curriculum, the education, the pathway to work, had a missing link for the technical, and that is partly what contributed to people thinking going the academia way was much better than going the professional way. So in the days of old, if you had a trade test, whatever it was, there was no way you would cross over to have an equivalence on the other side of the academia. In that, we changed and then brought in the missing lines, the dotted lines, the lateral one, the horizontal lines. We had the way up. You could have grade test 1, 2, 3, or rather starting from 6 going up all the way. But then there's no way you will actually find yourself in a lecture room. We then came up with horizontal connections, not just the upward facing. So that was worked out and fixed. That's why we have got institutions like the Kenya National Qualification Authority, where for the first time you can actually pick whatever route you want to go. Are you going to go the professional route, or do you want to go? So as a professional, you can actually get a CPA, and you do not have to struggle for us to actually know whether you are a degree holder or not, because somehow for purposes of politics, then we say, for you to run for this particular seat, you need this. A man who, for example, in the days of old, we had people going to the military. You are picking officer cadets. people who ordinarily should be university graduates. At that particular time, we didn't have military science as a degree and everything else. This person goes into that particular sector, works so well, is trained and is competent. But when he comes out here, we want to treat him as an illiterate. Of course, over the years, we've changed that now. There was Egerton University helping out to come up with a military science degree. Now we have got, of course, the Defense University College running and all that. But then now the Kenya National Qualification and even the pathway to work has actually fixed that. So partly to deal with that. By the way, I know people, including the guy who was here who's just left, who are getting funding specifically to change mindset of people into the TVET sector, because we've put in a lot of money, and I'm telling you, it's 30 billion shillings in the last 10 years plus. We have got a TVET authority, we've got a standardized curriculum, we have got newer tutors being hired, we have machines in those particular colleges, but very few students. The reason is so simple. It's the mindset. That's what people are working around. So it wasn't like there is any contradiction. Also, across the world, and I would quote something that you can actually find online. Steve Jobs, who is the CEO of Apple, said, the reason why so many people are manufacturing in China is not because China is actually cheap. China ceased to be cheap for manufacturing long time ago. It's because there is sufficient, a critical mass of those fine skills of people who can actually do the manufacturing. And he said that in the US, if you are to look for people who can actually do a fine manufacturing of a phone, you might not even fill a stadium. So everybody wants an iPhone. There are very few people to make it. Those people are not up here. So that is exactly what I was actually saying. We are correcting that. And CBC, by the way, is going to be the best equalizer of time. At the moment, it actually has got a little bit of a problem of bad publicity because a lot of the parents and the people who are engaging it have not cared to read and understand it. They still have got the privilege, the 844 privilege, and prejudice, of course, coming with this is who we are. We were the better people. We are the best generation. So that will be fixed out. I needed to clear that out. Secondly, it's also important to actually fix out. When I actually spoke about Kenya not having policies that are good, it wasn't antagonistic. And I will actually tell you this. Number one, I was telling you, you know that my domain work is actually public policy.
Yes.
And that's what I've been feeding myself and family and everybody who knows me. That's what brought me on TV. That's what I teach. That's what I go around doing. But I'll tell you this, that a lot of times, and for a light story, for just a light moment to bring this point home without necessarily making it too serious, sometimes when you talk academia, people with suits looking so serious, it makes academic conversations very difficult for the audience out there. You know, there is this story by anthropologists that the reason why we developed the speaking capacity, why we communicate, is that it started because human beings loved gossip. It is gossip that made us to start talking and communicate. To bring it home, it's this, that probably we are storytelling animals, and that is the difference between us and other animals. Because you are not going to find zebras with their studio telling a story. What we are doing here is storytelling, whatever you call it. You're not going to find a zebra from Masai Mara going to Tsavo to actually give a speech or even lecture. It doesn't work. It's still storytelling. That has actually permeated into our nature, and that is why you will actually find some stories that are actually made to look like they're true. One of those is that Singapore and probably South Korea borrowed our ideas. We do comparisons that are not true. For example, at independence, Kenya had 8 million people. During that particular year, South Korea had 28 million people. When you compare Singapore and Kenya, that is not like for like. For one, Singapore has got a population that is less than the population of Nairobi. The way it's geopolitically placed, how it left Malaysia, every one of that. And that's why I'm actually saying sometimes we conflate the ideas, the concrete ideas in the proposed policies for policies. Because part of policy is also leadership, is also management. It's deep inside that particular document. And that is why initially I spoke about 3. How do you manage the politics around a problem? This is where the biggest problem is, the management of those politics. Even if you look at it technically and say that you define a problem as data, you define management of politics as indicators, and of course you remain with the program as it were, you will still end up with one thing. How you turn data into indicators that are actually acceptable because you're not forcing it to people. It's important to remind people that planning, because policy is planning is not a technical job, it's a very political job. A politician can be elected for promising a bridge where there is no river, and he will actually be elected on that. So planners must always remember that when you're looking at plans, when you're looking at policies, it's first of all political. If there's no political buy-in, it doesn't go so far. So sometimes when we do those comparisons, and for South Korea, for example, have we looked at how much America pumped in because of the Cold War? How many American dollars went in? Because South Korea was supposed to be the last buffer of, quote unquote, the countries for communism. That no further, if South Korea fell, then the rest of the world would fall to communism. We forget the geopolitical attendant acts that actually came into that. So a lot of times, and I have taken a lot of time to talk about that because politicians have mastered the art of ensuring that the story is so simple and is sweet. So when you just tell us that at independence we were the same with Korea and Singapore and the Asian tigers, they do not include the other side because all of us have read and watched that lady's talk about the danger of a single story.
Yes.
But politicians have no time to actually tell you the other side of it. So it was important that I just point out on that. Again, there was the issue of brain drain. It's important to also understand that as a country we do not have natural resources. And I don't want to go elsewhere. I just want to compare with our neighbors. When I went to school, 16% of our land was arable. Today, because of using acidic, the urea and others, that land has actually shrunk to 8% that is arable. It's still rain-fed. We do not have, and you can actually check Tanzania. 50% of it is under forest cover. Look at that. That is, I'm not talking about Uganda where you can actually just slash and burn the land and plant. Try that even in Kitale. You will not harvest anything. The resource that we have as a country are our people. Even as a leading economy, the only thing that we have and sets us apart are the people we have. And by the way, human resource is just a resource like any other. So when we send our people out there, let us not be so quick to shout and talk about brain drain. That is what we have, and that's what we are giving to the world. By the way, just as one of those a success to middle-level colleges, we took over the hospitality industry when Utalii did not have a degree. Today, Utalii has got a degree, and we are no longer controlling the hospitality sector. So it's not like separate sectors need separate skill set. So on that, we don't have resources. Let's not talk about brain drain. I have seen people actually chastise the idea that we want to send people abroad. What we have to offer is who we are as a people, because we have got very little and waxy oil. We don't have mineral. You cannot compare with our neighbors. We don't have arable land, at least until we start making sense of the north, where 67% of our country is arable and semi-arid, as in arid and semi-arid. Once we change that, and LAPSET was actually the game changer for that, because once you actually actualize LAPSET, you triple our economy. But somehow, because of insecurity and all, even mentality, you can actually praise sessional paper number 10. And you also know that politically, the people in the north will not smile at you if you talk about that sessional paper. They will say it was focused around the agricultural rich south. And it left out, it looked at the areas of high potential. So how you look at policy is different. But over and above, the process of building a republic is long. The process of building a nation is long. It takes time for us to actually come home to what we need. Some of those realizations will be done way after we have died. But I think as a country we are doing well. You see, CBC is a bold decision. You know, the resistance that has been there. But it's a proposal from the sector actors. These guys in the sector are the ones who said, this is how the market is. But finally, on my submission on this particular post is this. There is the competing philosophy on education. Again, if you're going to turn the education sector primarily as the pipeline that serves the industry, again, you limit education. Sometimes education is an end in itself. There are people who go to school, when you have got a degree, you come with mobility and freedom to become whatever you want. No wonder you are commissioned to go and read all that pertains to that. So, if we only limit it, and that is at philosophical level, it will become a little bit problematic if you bring it here, especially for how government is looking at it, because government is looking at two things. We have got human resources, we capacitate them, they start working so that we tax them. They're not always about it, because this is where we are getting money. So from where we are going again, it will be also not honest of us to turn higher education into simply a nursery. When I talk about a nursery, is where seedlings grow. That we are turning it into a nursery of workers. It could be a nursery of thinkers. It could be a nursery of people who are out for self-actualization. So it doesn't have to be limited to that. But that, of course, when you have got this particular conversation, is limited to the realities out there.
Okay. And of course, going back to Daktari, we are talking about the competency-based curriculum. Universities, especially in the private universities, you are told to prepare yourself. Also, you're going to inculcate that CBC into your curriculum. Are those private universities ready? And of course, what are some of these areas you're looking to, especially to fully implement with CBC?
Thank you very much. One important thing is that universities are the ones that produce the implementers, the executors of CBC. The teachers that we are training are the ones that are getting into training those kids in high school, secondary school, and primary school. So currently, universities are on top gear. Other than, I can tell you, the university that directly relates to me, Mount Kenya University, the Faculty of Education, the School of Education is at top gear of curriculum review, adjustment, so that we prepare people who are competent to handle the kids who are in the lower levels. Equally, we are also saying in 2027 we shall be receiving the first cohort
of
CBC into the universities. And they will not just come to learn education, but in all the fields. So every other field is at top gear of reviewing the syllabus, so that these guys who are prepared at secondary level and they're coming into the university will not land into a strange environment. They land into a continuum. It will be a continuation. It will be them now coming to upgrade from where they have learned. So universities, and we're asking all the universities, and of course, the Commission for University Education is involved in reviewing the syllabuses and the curriculums so that they are synchronized with the CBC. Otherwise, we may waste, if we do not do that, we may waste these kids who are coming from secondary school as they land in the universities, which we don't want to do. So that one for sure, I can tell you, universities that they're on their feet to make sure that they review the curriculums to fit the cohort of students who will be produced through the CBC. And of course, this is important, because at the end of the day, and I agree, at the end of the day, Kenya is more of a human resource hub. And we would wish to actually make CBC an international curriculum. Today, you look at the number of students who are also taking 844, who are foreigners. But CBC, given its way of the way it is arranged, the competency-based, we can actually take this to other countries. So we just need to be good, we just need to understand it, we need it to work. And when it works for us, just like you have the British curriculum that is all over, we can make our Kenyan CBC curriculum an international curriculum where we can establish schools in other parts of the country, in other parts of Africa. And this can work.
Indeed, the credibility of our education system.
Just a moment, it's just a point. It's actually working. In Somalia, in South Sudan, the Kenyan system is one of the most sought
In terms of credibility?
Yes.
Yes. Nyambani, we're coming to you. You can also respond in terms of the credibility itself, given that the notion was that 844 allowed us to cram things instead of being practical. The CBC curriculum allows us to be creative at the end of the day, and it does not entail in terms of tests alone, in terms of practicality as well. But we also saw an interesting thing, especially in this year's KCSE 2023, which is very significant, is that because they coincide with the introduction of the new grading system that was used, and the intended of this new grading system that was used on the KCSE 2023 was to allow to increase the university admissions, not just in the university, but TVET as well as in other sectors. And of course, the redesigned structure, which was unveiled in August, drops the requirement of compulsory subjects from 5 to just 2 in determining the candidate's final score. Has this improved, especially in terms of grading that we have witnessed, especially in these exams?
Oh, well, maybe I'll start with CBC, and I want to say that, of course, it's good to give Kenyans hope that the Kenyan education system has always competed globally. The only evidence is because most of our students can be admitted into universities abroad and be able to do courses that they desire, so long as they qualify. So, but of course, over time, because we have also an obligation, changing the curriculum is not necessarily a rationale from the Kenyan perspective. It is international non-state actors that also require that we keep on advancing and updating our educational systems to fit the international requirements. Because of diplomacy, we are what we call educational diplomacy. So all of us are together in one to address common trans-border issues. We realize that the 844 system has been there with us and may not have been addressing the current issues that we face. And any curriculum design or syllabus should address or should be dynamic but not rigid. So the 844 system, which we are actually transiting or phasing out, has been rigid. So when it comes to the grading system, well, it is the preserve of the Kenya National Examination Council, with, of course, consultation with other stakeholders, to keep on reviewing systems and also the grading systems. It's up to the public and the Kenyan people to judge. I may not judge, to see whether we have, by doing so, enhanced or achieved what we intended. I then to think that, of course, rightly we have improved. Like if you look at the grade A overall, we have improved a bit comparison with last year's. Again, but of course the performance could be seen in different spectrum. Somebody seated there could simply say we have declined, but I think in one way or the other, going forward, it's a way of improvement. But I know the only room that is bigger is the room for improvement. And that's why I keep on saying that the reviewing of this, whatever we're going forward, is necessary.
And of course, given, gentlemen, we have only a few minutes to go, let me allow you 30 seconds for your final remarks. Let me start with Maliba. Please, 30 seconds.
I think we are doing well as a country. The education budget remains the biggest that we have as a country. Teachers remain the biggest number of public officers out there. And it means that both as a society, as a country, and as a people, we are really interested in self-improvement. And one way towards that has actually been through education. Every other day we get a university getting a charter. I still feel we have got lesser, probably a population of about 55 million people. We should have a minimum of at least 200 universities that are actually functional. So that there's room and there's choice. We are doing well. We actually are a properly educated country. And if you think you're waiting for any other person, there's none. We were those people that our ancestors were waiting for. We are here.
Okay. Daktari, 30 seconds, please.
Thank you very much. I would actually maybe add a little on what you said, that we are on duty. We are currently on duty. We should be the people on duty. Mine is to challenge universities, because that's where I'm coming from. That universities should work towards identifying themselves with a niche area They should become centers of excellence in particular areas. They should identify solutions, problems and solutions in this economy. And not just in this economy, globally. We should see a lot of innovation, a lot of research output, and even commercializing of our research outputs being done. I invite people with resources to interact with universities and identify research areas, research outputs, patents that have been done, and commercialize them, so that we can turn this country into a really an emerging economy. And universities are there, we are available, our faculties are there to liaise with the industry, to do research and support. And at the end of the day, everybody will be happy.
Nyambani, 30 seconds, please.
Yeah, just three things. One, the capitation to education gradually is improving. We commend the government for that. And we urge that members of parliament, as they unite to seek for CDF, they should unite to increase capitation. Two, the universities and other training colleges, teacher training colleges, should now sit down and synchronize the curriculum, the training curriculum, going forward, so that any other teacher graduating either from the university or from the colleges, teachers' colleges, should be able to teach the CBC and implement it. Finally, I wish to invite all the parents looking for CBC grade 7 and 8 to visit Isinya. Look for me at Merisho School. It was a nice show, and thank you. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Dr. Vincent Gai, the Secretary General of the National Association of Private Universities in Kenya, thank you for making time for us. Maliba Arnold Nyenjai, of course, a prominent figure here, Strategic Communication Advisor of the UDA Party. Congratulations once more. And of course, he's domiciled in the policy. That's why you see he talks about public policy. And then finally, Philip Pande, who just left, Youth Inclusion Advisor. And then finally, Joshua Nyambani, an educationist, as well as a tutor. Thank you so much for making time for us, gentlemen. This is the this is the second program. The first program was yesterday in terms of news check. I will be carrying on this particular conversation, given it is very vital to our society, and of course it is one of the key pillars of the current administration in terms of improving our education in the country, and of course in terms of capitation as well. It's a conversation that will carry on until the end of this particular week in terms of the education sector and where are we as a country for the KCSE 2023 candidates who are able to sit for that particular exam. Over 899,000 of them, they were able to sit for that particular examination. We're even not able to talk about the 3,000 who are registered, but they did not sit for that particular examination. Also, in terms of the university, we even failed to talk about, given that we had little time, in terms of the open universities that the president has proposed. And we've seen also universities going online. You don't have to go to a university campus to be taught physically. You can also be taught virtually with the technological advancements in the country. That has been our program this morning, and of course my name is Abdiaziz Hashim. Do join my colleague in just a few, that is Kasichana Masha. She'll be carrying on the conversation in Tamrini as well. For now, good morning and enjoy the rest of your viewing.